All right, welcome back, everyone. We're going to continue with our material regarding respiratory system. So on the note, let's see where we left off. We are right here talking about the air-blood barrier. So there's quite a bit that we talked about in our previous video. Just make sure we're comfortable with that content. And we're going to expand a little bit more about that in today's video. So, gas exchange. Gas exchange, as far as all this is concerned, this is just, again, kind of recapping some information from the previous video. We were talking about how the gas is going to cross the respiratory membrane via diffusion. Just make sure you're comfortable with what diffusion is. Remember, diffusion is the movement of gases, or any molecule for that matter, from high to low concentration. So from high to low concentration. So make sure you're good with that. What are the things that we're moving from high to low concentration? In this case, it's gases because it's the respiratory system. But we are, in fact, moving oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen in because we need oxygen to survive, right? Carbon dioxide out because it's a waste product. It's toxic. It can kill you. On the previous slide, we saw these white cells and these green cells found near the alveoli. We can talk a little bit more about what they are now. Macrophages are the white cells. Those are white blood cells. They're involved with a number of different factors with the immune system. I'm perfectly fine with just saying they had protection. Whereas the surfactant cells secrete a coating that covers the alveoli, and that coating helps with the gases to move across. So that's pretty much it for the time being. Don't have to get too in-depth with that. Okay. Events of respiration. So there are 4 events of respiration, 2 of which I really need us to understand a little bit more in detail. Pulmonary ventilation, simply put, moving air in and out of the lungs. That's just the same thing as saying breathing. I just typically call it breathing. External respiration. This is one that we do need to know. So I'm going to put a star next to that. External respiration is gas exchange between the pulmonary blood and the alveoli. So if that sounds a little weird, how I summarize external respiration is I just write out it's the exchange of gases between the lungs and the blood. So exchanging gases between the lungs and the blood. That is the point of external respiration. Next, what's another event of respiration? Well, we have respiratory gas transport, which, again, that sounds kind of complicated. Transport of gases via the bloodstream. We have an entire chapter dedicated to this stuff. Cardiovascular and circulatory system. It's pumping blood throughout the entire body to make sure that it goes where it needs to go. So we have a ton of information on this stuff that we're going to learn in the near future. The other one that we really need to focus on as far as respiratory events is internal respiration. Internal respiration is going to be gas exchange between the blood and tissue cells in systemic capillaries. Once again, if that sounds a little complicated, I have an easier way to summarize that. For internal respiration, what I tend to think is I say it's exchange of gases between the blood and the cells. So you're exchanging gases between the blood and the cells this time around. Okay. Next, mechanisms of breathing, or the mechanics of breathing. Breathing is a mechanical process, meaning it's not something automatic. You have to apply force for it to occur. Granted, the level of force that is being utilized here is nothing absurd or anything like that. It is dependent on volume, and volume can cause different levels of pressure. Basically, the more volume you have, the less pressure you have, the more pressure you have, et cetera, et cetera. And when these pressure changes occur, it can cause the gases to flow accordingly. So this is stuff that we're going to expand upon later on future videos. I don't really get into too much detail in relationship to volume and pressure in regards to the lungs. That's stuff that may be a little bit more advanced than we need. There are 2 phases of breathing. Inspiration and expiration, or inhale and exhale. Inspiration is the flow of air into the lungs. Expiration is the flow of air out of the lungs. Should be common sense. When it comes down to inspiration and expiration, the way I always tell people to learn it is simply breathe. Take a conscious breath. So for inspiration, when you breathe in, there's some things you should have noticed. The first thing that we observe, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles contract. Diaphragm is the long horizontal muscle found lower than the rib cage. The intercostal muscles are going to be the muscles found in between each rib. And when those muscles contract, they are going to tighten. And that tightening process allows for the rib cage to expand outward. So once again, if you just take a deep breath, you can feel your rib cage expanding outward. You can feel the muscles start to tighten and activate. External air is going to be pulled into the lungs due to an increase in intrapulmonary volume. Basically, it creates like a vacuum, allowing air to be suctioned in. Here we see exactly what inspiration looks like. Once again, the muscles contract. It's going to cause the rib cage to move upward and cause the diaphragm itself also to move downward to create more space. Exhalation. Exhalation is largely a passive process which depends on natural lung elasticity. So once again, if you take a deep breath in and you breathe out, you'll notice on that breathing out process, it was passive. There wasn't a lot of force that needed to be applied. The muscles are relaxed. That's the whole idea. Forced expiration can occur mostly by contracting internal intercostal muscles to depress the rib cage. So there is a unique phenomenon. You can breathe out more than normal. That forced expiration is actually causing the rib cage to contract and tighten. And when that occurs, you're going to apply even more pressure, causing the rib cage to press in on the lungs and force any extra air out. Obviously, that's not something that we normally do as far as our normal breathing process, but it is a method that can be useful for exercise. Here we just see exactly what we were just mentioning, just in picture format. And finally, to finish up for today, we're going to talk about non-respiratory air movements. Non-respiratory air movements, simply put, are movements of air that don't involve, it's not for breathing purposes. So sometimes these can be reflexive or reflexes. Other times they can be voluntary actions. Sometimes it can be both. As far as that's concerned, the examples of non-respiratory air movements that we examine, coughing and sneezing. So coughing and sneezing is almost exclusively a reflex, right? You cough if you have something in your lungs, in your bronchi, in your trachea, and it's irritating. You sneeze when you build up too much pollen, dust, debris in your nose, so you force it out, you expulse it. Laughing is typically a mixture of both. It can be a voluntary action. If you see something funny, you're going to laugh, right? That's expected. But if you have a group of friends, and I'm sure you've been here before, and they're all laughing together, suddenly you start laughing just because you are picking that up. And that's typically empathy. Someone who's more empathic is just going to be more sensitive to the different emotions of other people. So that can also make you happy and jovial. Speaking of empathy, crying. Obviously, crying is something that's more of it is more voluntary, but it's also a reflexive action. You know, if you get something in your eyes, you're going to tear up in order to clear out and flush out anything in your eyes. So that is normal. It is expected for that to occur. But crying can also be a voluntary reaction of emotion. It can be, typically we think of it as a sadness and anger, but it can also be incredible happiness as well. Yawning. Yawning is such an interesting phenomenon. You can think of a yawn, you can hear someone yawn, you can see somebody yawn, and you're likely going to yawn. In fact, you may have yawned just listening to me talking about this video. Yawning is something that is indicative of being tired, but what's been shown and what the leading theory is that yawning could be a mimicry situation. It's a subconscious behavior that when you meet other people, there's a higher likelihood you're going to behave like them. And one of the basic examples of mimicry that we express is locking eyes with someone. You see someone else, you're talking to someone else, you're going to lock eyes with them, and that's enough to communicate nonverbally for just a small period of time. And finally, hiccups, the bane of many people's existence. Hiccups is a circumstance where you have air trapped in your lungs, and that usually happens because of eating or drinking too fast. The diaphragm starts to spasm, and as that spasms occur, it actually causes a little bit of shakeup, releasing air, and then creating sound, which is what we hear as hiccups. The interesting thing regarding hiccups is that a lot of the methods of treatment for hiccups are actually backed by science. So that includes holding your breath, that includes drinking water, that includes getting scared, which getting scared can cause a big gasp of air in or a big scream, which is a lot of air out. Basically, you're trying to regulate the air, the internal pressure in the lungs. And a lot of these things I just mentioned can help with that. All right. So I think that's a good place to stop. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We're making good progress. We're a little more than halfway there or so. But I look forward to continuing on with respiratory system. Have a great one.